Good afternoon, everybody. I am joined by a friend across the border, Allison Graham, who I had the pleasure of meeting at a keynote speaking conference a couple of years ago. And we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the time, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today to get to know her a little bit better. She is a leader in the stress, resilience, and coaching space and has done a lot of work, and I'm excited to hear about it. So, without further ado, I present to you Allison Graham.
Well, it's awesome to be here in your facility. And yeah, I'm excited about the conversation.
Absolutely. So, can you tell me a little bit about your own personal history and how did you get into what you're doing now?
So it was a very specific moment in time when resilience became my obsession.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at my neurologist's office. He was my ninth specialist in my fourth hospital in 2 years.
Wow.
And I was so desperate for answers because I'd had a surgery and things went wrong and caused post surgical neuropathic pain.
Wow.
And I was told he was my hope, right? I walked in there and I'm like, they're going to fix me. And he's like, yeah, I can't fix you. This is it. He's like, you need to reevaluate your expectations for your life. And I was so scared in that moment. I was desperate, right? Like I was like so much pain and just everything going on. And I don't know if you know, like you go through one thing, but then it's like the beginning domino that just makes
Mm.
everything else harder.
Oh, yeah.
And he wanted me to go on disability. That was his answer. He's like, like you're never going to work full time again. Like, let's talk about you going on disability insurance. And I knew that wasn't the answer. And so I told him that in not a very graceful way. And he's like, well, you're going to need to learn how to be resilient. And it was in that moment, I'm like, I don't totally know what that means. I'm going to figure it out. And I left that hospital like defiant. Like I was going to prove that doctor wrong. Like he was not right. And I would not let my pain define the direction of my life. And that's when the obsession with the topic began, but also a lot of frustration.
Interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like your knee jerk response to him saying you need to be resilient was that, oh, I'm going to show this guy, that wanted me to go on disability what I'm actually made of. So it's
Yeah.
it's interesting how in some ways he planted a seed that he didn't know how that was going to blossom into what we're seeing today.
No.
Yeah.
But it was so frustrating. So this was before YouTube, before
Oh,
we
I can
had all of
imagine.
this,
I can
right?
imagine.
And I went searching, and most of what I knew about resilience were athletes who were already like just built differently, right? Like they're, if
Mm-hmm.
you hear the story of the Olympian who's incredible and they've worked every day and then they break a leg and then they have to heal and then they come back and you see
Yeah.
them up on the podium. Or like it just felt like it was for the big stuff. And I was having trouble getting out of bed every day. Like I went from being somebody who was 18 hours a day, upset, like deserved to hit the pillow, like had to like make every day phenomenal, to having 2 to 5 hours of functionality before my body collapsed.
Wow.
And that was a very difficult transition. Biggest blessing in my life because it led to figuring out how do I do what I'm doing in less time? How do I learn to say no and set boundaries so I'm not taking on too much stuff or
Mm-hmm.
stuff that isn't my own responsibility? There were just so many pieces of the puzzle that needed to come together for me to figure it out. And a lot of the resilience work didn't feel relatable, or it felt too cliche. Like, oh, you've just got to push through. And I'm like, I'm a great pusher througher. The problem is you can only push through for so long.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not to undermine what you're saying, but I was shoveling snow the other day, and I kept pushing, and at some point, I was like, I got to take a break,
The
because
weather wasn't
yeah,
taking a break.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And so, but I took a couple of deep breaths and walked around a little bit, and then I came back and I was able to continue. little slower, but that when you say push through, that reminded me of what I just did this weekend,
Yeah.
physically in that respect.
Isn't it amazing, right? But we're taught, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep pushing. But the thing is, maybe the way you're pushing is not the right way. Like maybe it needs to be a shift, like it was for me, of reevaluating my life and finding different systems and different ways to get the work done without the angst that really drains. So anyway, that was a long time ago, but it led to this like obsession with the topic, which I ended up creating my own frameworks on resilience. And also though, like it just has been many years. And at the time I had a training and speaking business on networking and business development. And what I noticed was that as I would go in and I would either coach with people who are trying to build their business or go and do a training session, in the hallway on the way out the door, people would be like, I'd love to get out there, but I'm so stressed and I'm so overwhelmed and I'm so burned out, it doesn't even matter. And up until I started to realize that what I was going through behind the scenes that nobody could see, the pain, the collapsing, the showing up, putting a smile on my face and pretending everything is phenomenal, but behind the scenes going into the hospitals and the doctors and the injections and everything else, was like, everybody has a version of that. They may not have neuropathic pain from a surgery, but they could have autoimmune, they could have an allergy, they could have a child who's got an addiction, they could have a grandparent who they're trying to care for. Like everybody is going through something behind the scenes. And that's when I shifted gears in my business, was to look, it's not just about networking and building the money and being strategic about that. It's about how do I actually love my life and achieve that and deal with the stuff going on behind the scenes.
I love how you kind of touch on that topic in terms of that everybody's going through something. And, I think that, I can relate to that very personally in terms of, being kind of that sandwich generation where you're taking care of your children, you have elderly parents, elderly in-laws going through something or another. And so you're kind of in that position where you're trying to take care of everyone and potentially even give yourself some time on the schedule to take care of yourself. And I think that the way that you described that is very accurate. That you have these individuals that you're already coaching for business and leadership and things like that, but now they're expressing these inner battles that they're going through. That they want to be that Olympian you talked about. They want to have that resilience, but they're not shown. And I think that's such a crucial part of the discussion, even for us in our office, where you were just mentioning even boundaries, about setting those boundaries for yourself to say, okay, this is my time. This is the time that I need to rest, recover, invest in myself so that I can go and help somebody else. So I can be a better mother of a daughter or son or whatever role you're playing in your community's life overall.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's having that compassionate curiosity with yourself. Like, how can I get through this? How can I, and we can talk about being resilient yourself, but picking up on what you said about like everybody has something going on. So I remember I was working with this group of 40 people at a financial services firm, and there was a lot of infighting and a lot of resentment building. And it used to be like this optimistic organization. And the HR person called me and said, like, I don't know, something shifted. As we went in, and I did my 12-week program on problem solving for the human experience, and it was really well received. And as we started digging deep, there were a lot of assumptions being made, and specifically about one of the partners. Okay. So the administrative staff would be like, oh, he's just like always taking these long lunches and going through, and he just doesn't care, and he's throwing work on our desk. And he's like, well, that's kind of your job, right? Like that's why I'm putting it on your desk.
Yeah.
And it was this assumption. And as we started, and by the way, that's not a atypical story. That's happened with many companies I've worked with. And as we started to dig deep, it actually, what he hadn't told anybody was that the reason he was taking long times was because he was taking his wife to cancer treatment. And he was going through all this stuff in the family. And the level of de-escalation when they understood, oh, he's not just turned into a jerk, he's actually going through something that is really scary and not emotionally managing it very well. The level of compassion that came out of that, like, just defused the angst.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why don't we just make the assumption to begin with?
Yeah.
That somebody's going through something.
100%.
It doesn't excuse bad behavior. It doesn't excuse not being able to emotionally regulate and taking it out on other people, which is a whole other story.
Yeah.
Everybody has to take responsibility for that.
For sure.
But as we're walking through the grocery store line and somebody's being a little bit more aggressive, what if you just assume they're going through something?
Yeah.
And you're kind.
Yeah. And I think that concept of compassion is so true. And I think that the one thing that, I'll steal a line from Brené Brown in terms of leaning into vulnerability, in terms of if you share your vulnerability with others, then they're going to see more of the human being in you and be able to actually work with you and relate to you more in terms of, and this is something that I've struggled with, being the child of immigrant parents who, it was never taught to me that, hey, if you're struggling with something, you should tell your friends about it and whatnot. You should try to figure out what's going on, and stuff like that. And, I think the one thing that even my wife does a good job of in terms of nurturing friendships, and this is something that I've kind of learned from her even, is that friends are not just there to like party with or be there in the good times, but they're also there because they want to know, true friends want to know what's going on with you, even if things aren't going well. Yes. And by confiding in them, or I should say sharing with them during those times, that actually improves and strengthens your relationship with them and can allow you to actually work through your issues or obstacles or angst, whatever it is you're going through at that time, and improve your resilience to the situation and down regulate that stress that you may be going through. And so I think that that's a very good point that you brought up in terms of the partner's story, that he was taking his wife to cancer therapy and his coworkers didn't know about it, and had he shared that information, maybe that they would actually get behind him more and actually say, hey, what can we do more?
Right.
Give us more work so you can go take care of her more, things like that.
Exactly. So, and so I love Brené Brown's work, and she, I believe, is the reason that our society has become more open with these conversations. Like, she was a tipping point of just turning in the corporate environment. Before Brené Brown came along, it was hard to sell this stuff, right? People are like, we don't want to go that deep, Allie. Keep it on the surface. And I like to go deep. There is a risk in vulnerability, though. Can we talk about this? And I heard it from one of our keynote speaker colleagues, Riaz, and he said at one of the events, he said, you can't be vulnerable until you have credibility. Mm-hmm. So credibility before vulnerability. When you're in a leadership role, when you are in with strangers who haven't earned the right for your vulnerability yet. Different when we're on camera and we're offering and sharing. But sometimes it can be really overwhelming for people to hear too much.
Yes.
And to know too much. And if you have in the past, like sometimes with leaders, it's like there's this, I don't know, it's such a sweet balance that I've had to work with some. It's like, you can't tell your team that you're scared to death and you, right? Like, you have no idea what you're doing and you feel like a total imposter. And yet you can't look like you've got it all together and that there's no vulnerability and they feel like they're failing because you're so incredible and up on this pedestal. There is definitely a balance of the vulnerability. So picking the places, picking what you share, being more thoughtful, because sometimes you can put it out there, like even, the speaking group that we were a part of. I think when we were talking a couple of weeks ago before we booked this, it's like, I have a lot of vulnerability hangover
Yeah.
from there, because I went in thinking they're saying, oh, it's a place to be vulnerable and to share all the truest frustrations. And I mean,
Yeah.
I was going through a time where my health, I thought maybe I might lose my eyesight with a couple of the diagnoses and different things, and just family stuff going on and money stuff going on. And I was in the most vulnerable spot of my life. And I showed up.
I recall. I mean,
fully vulnerable,
yeah,
and it backfired with some.
Yeah.
Not all.
Yeah.
So you've got to pick your spot.
For sure. And I think that goes to this phrase that my wife and I will talk about often in terms of, and she's a better practitioner of this than I am, in terms of knowing your audience.
Yes.
And in terms of knowing which room you're in, who you're talking to, what are some of the kind of more appropriate topics to converse about with the people that you're around. I mean, so it's it's almost like we just went through a very contentious election, and there were people who are on one side versus another, and so if you're friends with one side and you may think of the other way, or is it worth sometimes opening up that Pandora's box to risk a friendship, and things like that, and so, and some may argue one way, some may argue the other way, but it's knowing your audience and knowing also what's the value of sharing everything versus things that actually will help to improve your overall resilience, for the community's resilience, and down regulating the unnecessary stress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a balance.
Yeah. And I think I even remember in our initial discussion when we talked about this concept of stress, you talked about somewhat of the necessity of stress.
Yes.
Can you kind of like share a little bit about that perspective in your work, and just how that's played a role?
So one of my foundational pieces of the puzzle is that I actually think that stress, we use the word too broadly to actually make stress, resilience, and problem solving without any context.
Yeah.
So it's like 1 minute you're stressed because somebody cut you off in line. Oh, it was so stressful. And then you're stressful because you've got a problem going on with your body, right? Like you're physically. And you're stressed because you've got your in-laws with you, right? And so we just use this word blanketly as if it's everything, right? But it's not the same type of stress. And so really it's about reframing stress, a bit of a zoom out and a zoom in. This is everything is about zooming in, zooming out, and seeing different things. So there's stress that you can't escape. When you are in survival mode, when you're in danger, somebody you love is in danger, you're going to have every being in your body is going to be stressed. And that's okay. And you can't stop it. That's the thing. It's like I used to judge myself because I was like, I'm really good at dealing with my stress. Why am I so stressed? Oh, because your life is in danger. That's why you're stressed. That's natural. Then there's the more destructive stress. That is the stuff that is self-generated through our patterns. It's the angst we wrap around everything we have to deal with. So having to go in for a really tough conversation, somebody would say is stressful. Well, the conversation itself is just the conversation. The stress is our story that we put around it. It's the negative emotion we put around it. It's the behavior we put around it. That's the destructive stress. And that we can actually minimize. But the good thing about stress is that there's also in our day-to-day moments when we feel very empowered by stress. And the empowering stress is going to focus you. It's going to inspire you. It's what we need to reach those goals. And it should not be feared. It should not be hated. It could be embraced. And when we have context for the type of challenge we're facing and the type of stress we're experiencing, then we can make friends with our stress and ride the waves better.
So it's almost like the, fourth quarter game time, got to make it happen kind of phenomena. Right. And it kind of reminds me of a conversation I just listened to with Tony Robbins talking about this concept. I forget how he labeled it, but it's almost like where he talked about, and I think they even don't quote me on this, but I believe they even did like blood work and saliva work on Tom Brady and even Tony himself when he's on stage or when Tom was playing football, where most people, when they get stressed, their cortisol levels will go up.
Right.
And their testosterone levels will also go up as a response too, in terms of to get more of that androgenic response to be able to flex your muscles or do whatever you need to do to survive in that situation. And so, and even from a focus perspective, but they were showing that these individuals who actually understood that this is a time when they need to actually perform in that fourth quarter kind of mode, their cortisol levels actually drop because they actually are not in a place where they're stressed, but they know they have to perform, and then their testosterone levels actually go up, and they're able to take care of whatever they need to take care of, whether it's scoring a touchdown, getting a deadline, giving a talk, leading a team through a tough quarter, or whatever those goals may be, versus the people who are, literally burning the midnight oil at both ends, and then, you know, stressing themselves out. I mean, not to use the word again, but like, literally, to the point where they're getting ill,
Right.
versus thriving off of that.
Yes.
Kind of, it's almost like the individuals that say that they like a challenge, or that they like, to be tested and whatnot. And so I have, in my short experience of life thus far, have experienced that, when you can embrace it in your advantage, then you can kind of make it more your friend, like you were saying, versus your foe.
Yes.
Overall.
And it's interesting because we can design our days to have those bits of focus.
Yeah.
But stress is not meant to be like, those hormones are meant to be danger signal and then come back and normalize.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem is that people are just like bucketing it all together and interpreting it all the same way. And it's just like all up here all the time. With my clients, what we end up doing is we look at their overall life, what they have going on. And so you can design your day to have bits of up and down, like these athletes, but in our workday. So it's putting on the blinders, doing our focused work, setting a deadline, having a goal, having accountability. It's got to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that, harnessing the power of it, that's good stress in action.
Mm-hmm.
And then the key, though, is you can't expect yourself to do that for 6 hours. You do 45 minutes or 75 minutes, depending on what your juju is. Everybody's a little bit different. And you focus in on that, and then the productivity goes through the roof, which is awesome. And it's the only way that I could actually take my 18-hour work days and put them into the 2 to 5 hours of functionality that I had. I got so focused and so accountable and so like laser-like on everything I had to do. I got everything done in a shorter period of time. That is empowering stress. It becomes destructive when we don't take the break, when we don't manage the normalization again, which is where most people are, or when we go and say things like, oh, I've got so much to do and I'll never get caught up, and why am I working late at night? Like, that's the angst.
Yeah. And I think you just touched on something that I remember even discussing with one of my best friends about that time when you said that you had that 2 to 5 hours that you had to make very efficient. During residency training and even medical school, most of the individuals that I was friends with, we were all pretty much single, or, maybe we had a significant other, but none of us were really that far along in terms of marriage or kids and things like that.
Yeah.
And so some of us, though, had like co-residents or senior residents or other med school students that did actually have children, in those periods of their education or training. And we noticed that those individuals were very good at their time optimization, in terms of where they knew that if they once they get home, they had to be as 100% of a parent with their kids because they only had a very limited opportunity to be with their kid. So they had to be 100% there. And then, so, whether they were, on their lunch break, you would catch them, studying as well, or every minute of the day was very optimized so that they could be that 100% parent when they get home, or spouse, or whatever other roles that they were playing, versus, us who had more of that privilege of, maybe having a more, leisurely lunch, whether it was even a 15-minute lunch during, between, like, cases or patients or whatnot, or where our time was a little bit more ours versus having to be kind of structured in a way to be able to be given to, children, or your spouse, or whatnot. And so I think that is interesting in terms of where you were forced, that in terms of to realize that ability to getting the important things done, and perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, but identifying really what did matter in that moment and maybe what did not matter to get done.
Absolutely.
And being okay with that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's just a lot to get done.
Yeah.
And people cause themselves destructive stress. So see, I always use a word in front of whatever word stress. So it's survival if we're in something for our lives, or similar. Destructive if it's unnecessary, and pattern-based. So that's why I'm using the word destructive stress.
Yeah.
So I would create destructive stress when I would worry about what I have to get done, when I would be like complaining about it, instead of just doing it. Like, if you think about all the time and angst that gets done and wrapped around the things we have to do by not doing it, but thinking about doing it. And it's like, just do it, and do it as efficiently and effectively as possible. And that, to me, is the answer to figuring that out. When you think about the parents who had to do it, it's because they were forced to. They didn't have a choice. And unfortunately, what happened, and which principle is that, where things expand the amount of time that you allot it?
It's
Pareto's principle, is it?
I think you're. I think. Is it? Yeah.
Pareto. I don't know. Yeah, you'll say it right. Cut that out of the video, but but they will expand to what you give it. And when I first became a columnist for the newspaper, I used to write for local newspaper. It was this popular column, and I have 4 columns to deliver a week. And when I first got hired, it was destructively stressful. My life revolved around this column, and it wasn't a feasible way to live my life, because, and this was before the pain, but I was also running a health care organization that's provided resources for mental health.
I mean, is there anything you haven't done?
You know what? I am a little bit like, I'm going to do a whole bunch, and it makes me happy. And so what happened was, it was just all consuming. It wasn't that I was always doing the column or writing the column. It was that there was a part of my essence that was feeling guilty that I wasn't doing it yet, that I was thinking about what was I going to write eventually. And what I finally realized was, if I just, instead of starting it at 6 o'clock in the morning and submitting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon after like messing around with it, if I started at 1:45 and I went blinders on and parked the idea of the column for the rest of the day, then it only took that time out of my life, and I still got it in on time. And this was that to me, I look back and I go, oh, I didn't even know it. I was practicing destructive stress by elongating how much angst, right? Like, and how much energy and capacity it took from me. And then I figured out how to use empowering stress. When I finally went, no, I'm just going to do it, pull the Band-Aid off and get it in on time. And it's the guilt of not, sort of half doing this, half doing that, that I think actually causes a lot of our destructive stress.
It is. And I think it's also because we're not able to, and, this is a concept that I really like to focus on I like to try to practice this as best as I can, human being.
Of course.
We're all vulnerable to our, human faults. But, this concept of living in the moment, where, if you're able to say, okay, in this moment, what can I be doing? And, really, just being very objective to say, okay, it's almost like right now we're in Metro Detroit, looking outside, it's snowing. We can't go. I'm not going to walk outside in shorts and t-shirts. That's just objectively not possible for me. For maybe somebody it is, but not for me. So, in the same way, in terms of responding to a situation with our ability, and kind of taking that kind of yogic Eastern thought process of saying, okay, you're in this moment right now. What are the things that you can be doing to respond to, whether it's survival stress, destructive stress, or self-created stress, where maybe you are thinking about something that doesn't particularly even exist.
Right.
Where you may be stressed out about maybe what your spouse may be thinking about you about something, or that maybe that they were just tired and you thought they weren't talking to you because they were upset with you or something. So just even that, like, misunderstanding stress that could be there, or other things that we're creating in our own mind, which may not exist, but rather just living in the moment, being present as much as possible. I know it's easier said than done.
It is, yeah.
And that's where the practice comes, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like any kind of muscular workout that we do, that the more we work this, resilience muscle out, if you will, the more we're able to decipher those stresses, is what I'm hearing from you, to say, okay, how do I respond to these stressors the right way at the right time?
Exactly. Yeah. And you've hit on something that is so critically important, because it's the storyline. It's the storyline that creates the destructive stress. And so the spouse example, right? Like, or even if you're thinking about somebody who you work with, let's use a colleague in case somebody doesn't have somebody at home. And you go to work and you're in a great mood, but then somebody just sort of snaps at you or says something, and you go, oh my gosh, what have I done? And then you carry that around your day.
For sure.
So if you're feeling like, oh, they're angry with me, and then how is that going to make you feel? You're going to feel like, oh, disappointed, or like unsure of yourself, or like you have to try harder. And then what's that behavior that's going to come out of that, right? Well, you're going to be, probably trying hard and then more irritating, or, whatever the case may be. Or you're going to shut down and you're not communicate, or you won't ask a question because they're already angry with you and you don't want to bother them. Like, these are the sort of conversations that I have. And it's like, what if we went back to the beginning of what you were actually saying, what your storyline was in that moment?
Yeah.
And instead of going, oh, it has nothing to do with me, because it might have something to do with you, you don't know. It's like, why don't you ask the question? Or just neutralize the storyline. So it doesn't necessarily have to, if we're going, oh, they really don't like me, we don't have to go, oh, no, they love me, what is wrong with me? Like, we don't want to go that far, because your mind's going to go, right? Like, it's not going to like it.
Yeah.
But if you could neutralize it and just be like, maybe it has nothing to do with me, maybe it does, but right now I'm just going to keep showing up, or I could ask them later, or just come through. Because if we diminish the amount of angst in our stories and the words we use, we actually have a natural byproduct of diminishing the amount of destructive stress we feel.
I love that. Diminish the destructive.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Harness the empowering.
Yeah.
Diminish the destructive, and better ride the times of survival stress.
Love
with
it.
Compassionate curiosity, and stop judging ourselves for the human experience.
I love that. And so if somebody was going through, like in terms of how you help people, coaching, in terms of like who would be a good candidate, and who is somebody who may not be a great candidate to work with you?
So the people who don't get stressed, they're not my people. I read a couple, and actually when I was writing my last book, which hasn't come out yet, but I actually made a note of who are the 3 people who are not my clients.
Yeah.
Those are not my people, and like, good for them, the ones who never get bothered by anything.
Yeah.
On the other side of the flip side, I am not the person for someone who just wants to moan and be the victim and everything happens to me. I'm the people in the middle who are doing everything right. They're, they've done the self-help. They know they're not supposed to be stressed, and they've got some success in their career, but they're like, I really am not happy with how I'm living my life and the level of stress that I'm feeling. That is where, and I think that's a lot of us, but I tend to work with a lot of professionals.
Okay.
And that senior to mid executive level. When you get up to like CEO, you usually are one of those people that is just not stressed by things, but that, you know, you're in the sandwich either at work or at home, and you're like, I don't want to keep going like this for the next 15 years of my career. And we've got to redesign how you're approaching your life.
So somebody who's feeling the stress that wants to do something about it and has some level of motivation to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so simple.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. I think people think it's really hard, but it's as simple as like talking ourselves off of the, the dramatic storyline.
Yeah.
Right. It's having the compassionate curiosity to combat the harsh judgment of ourselves and others. And then getting really strategic around problem solving so that we are really not getting, pulled back in our lives and our performance. And then having that growth mindset so we can continue to strive towards our potential. Like this is the cycle that we can keep going around.
I love that. And that's very similar even for us in terms of patients that we're willing to work with. That if somebody's not particularly motivated, or if we can't get them to eat whole foods that are unprocessed, as an example, or even go for a walk once a day for like a half hour, something that's very kind of basic. I'm not even talking about anything more advanced or things like that. Then maybe they're not ready at this point to come in as a patient overall. And so in terms of, you kind of touched on, your speaking career and things like that. What are some opportunities you've had recently that you've really enjoyed, and what are some things that are coming up that, we should be on the lookout for?
So there is a Success Magazine article, that will be coming out. I think that it's actually not coming out to the fall, but I'm really excited about that because it unveils my triple resilience model.
Okay.
A lot of my work is going into companies and organizations and associations where either I do a keynote or actually do the deep dive training program on problem solving. I had a really cool last week, or I guess it would have been 2 weeks ago now, opportunity to work with some post-secondary school students.
Interesting.
I've done that, like where I've worked with the emerging leaders and the establishment, right? And a lot of the firms that will bring me in, I put both of them in the same room. But this was so cool because what I found was they are so stressed. And we know that, but to see them and then have them be vulnerable with me around why. I actually did a video on how leadership can alleviate the angst and the stress for their younger professionals. Because I'm serving often that mid to senior leader. But I think a lot of their destructive stress is coming from concern about their younger professionals who are emerging. And so I think there's a gap there. And I've, in my private coaching practice, which is fairly boutique, I work with people sort of for 90 days and then we get them all designed and off they go. And that's awesome. But I think we've got to get it from both sides.
Yeah.
There's a pretty big problem. And it's easy when you just follow along and you've got this little thing and a little thing and a little thing. That just starts to alleviate the pressure so you can feel happier while you're getting the work done.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I do have one story, though, that's just come to mind that I know we have to wrap. But
no.
A gentleman called me and he was a referral for my coaching practice. And he said, Allison, I have been so stressed. I figure I've got a decade left in my career and I don't want to keep going like this. I'm just not happy. And I hear you help executives redesign their life. And we did. We worked together. We did 6 months. And he went through the whole program and everything. And he was living his best life, like awesome. And I remember he called me on his way home from the airport, and he said, "Look, my wife has just gone in to go to the loo, and I wanted to call you and tell you that that was my first vacation in as much as I can remember since I've been working, where I truly relaxed." He said, "I loved it. I fell in love with my wife again. Thank you so much for all the work we did together." He died a year later.
Oh, wow.
This just happened about 6 months ago.
Oh, my gosh.
That man, who was, I used to tell everybody the story and recommend me to all his colleagues, and he did the heavy lifting to design his life, that he got to live it, that he was profitable and he was fulfilled and he was balanced in his terms of balance. And he got a year. And I'm so grateful that he got the year.
Mm-hmm.
My concern is so many people are so busy and so caught up in the destructive stress cycle that they're not taking the step out of it to look at their life objectively and go, how do I want to design this so that I can have, God willing, more than a year.
Yeah.
But today, to your point earlier about being in the present, that's all we've got.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling overwhelmed and burned out and like it's never going to end, and you've got the golden handcuffs because you're so stressed and yet you have the bills and you've got to stay, then I encourage you to be the person who says, I'm not going to keep going like this, and redesign your life.
And I love that in terms of helping this executive get the best out of his last year. And there's a book that I'm reminded of that a friend of mine, Dr. Joel Kahn, wrote, called Dead Execs Don't Get Bonuses, in terms of you work, but if you work to die, all of the fruit that you've been working for, you will not taste that. It's different if you're doing work, for, I think there's an Eastern metaphor that says about something about planting a tree that you'll never experience the shade of. That's more of like a nation building thought process where you're doing work for future generations. But in terms of, for yourself and for your family, I think that living in the moment and maximizing the time that you have is very important in that respect overall.
Yeah.
And in terms of this concept of death, and in terms of experiencing life, I know that before we began talking, and even how we began the conversation with your neuropathic pain, would you be willing to kind of talk a little bit about your personal health? And you were even sharing with me some recent weight loss and that journey.
Yeah, sure. So there's no big success story on the pain. The pain is still there.
Yeah.
I have, however, stopped fighting it. And what I mean by that is I used to wake up every morning, and I would say a very bad word, this hurts, and I'd literally start my day attached to the pain in anger. That had to stop. So making friends with the pain and going, okay, you're there. This has been a lot of years now, and it can be quite debilitating, and it's harder when I'm angry about it, and when I get mad at the surgeon, and when I had to forgive the surgeon. So there's that piece of it. Something I've had for a lot of years, and I'm happy to share, is a thing called sarcoidosis, which is a very random thing. And I think now they're calling it an autoimmune, although for a long time they didn't. And unfortunately, it can just go into any organ and be active, and then one day it'll just spontaneously go away, they tell me. But in the meantime, that for a while had impacted my eyes, which is why that was a concern. And then my skin and lung and different things. So it's a lot of ramifications for that, but you keep doing what you can. You got to keep searching while being okay with what does today look like.
Yeah.
And I think I was always trying to, even with that neurologist with the nerve pain, I was like, take me back. I want to go back to my life before the pain. And I spent so much time trying to find the magic snake oil that was going to miraculously make my pain go away or the sarcoidosis go away. And it's like part of living angst free, not angst free, but with less angst, less destructive stress, is being like, this is what I'm dealing with right now. And how do I be okay with that and manage the fear that can come with it and all of those things? And I'm not like, I mean, every day, like, I mean, your message is your message, right? I have to practice my resilience strategies and my reframing techniques and my, acceptance of stress as a whole every day, because it'll just make, when I get destructively stressed, my pain intensifies. My sarcoidosis, I don't know. I haven't been able to find I haven't found the connection yet with sarcoidosis and my diet or my stress levels or anything like that. Like I just haven't found the link. Maybe it's there. I don't know. Possible.
Very possible.
But yeah, I did. I went on a carnivore, which not everybody is a fan of. I do carnivore with a twist, which I don't recommend for anybody. I eat ice cream. Every now and again, I drink red wine.
Yeah.
And I can, Mexican is sort of the off topic one I have. But what it unveiled for me, and I've lost 65 pounds total, a couple things.
Incredible.
Yeah, thanks. It happened very quickly, but I think it was about the inflammation.
Yes.
My fibromyalgia is gone.
Wow, look at that.
And that was 22 years since I was diagnosed with that. But I figured out I'm allergic to potatoes.
Interesting.
So, and we're talking like hives with like blisters level of potatoes. And if you think about when you go gluten-free,
yes, everything's
potato starch.
Yeah.
And I would eat healthily by having potato, with half a cup of potato and some chicken and some veggies. And I ate so many veggies. And I think I was so inflamed for so many years because I was having all of this goodness that was coming in, technically goodness.
Yeah.
But my body didn't like it. And so with that, it was like, how could my body, but it was so used to getting it every day or every other day that my body didn't have a break to actually tell me anything. And when I eliminated everything except for meat and butter, essentially, then when I started reintroducing foods, my body could talk to me again.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we do in functional medicine
with
the elimination diet,
where
we take individuals off of certain foods. There's the corn, wheat, soy, nuts, tree nuts, peanuts, things like that.
Yeah.
Dairy, gluten out of the diet, and then we slowly reintroduce certain things. And if they've had allergy testing or food sensitivity testing, we take that into account as well and see how does it implicate. So and figuring out what is actually stressing, kind of going back to that concept of stressing the system and what's not, and what can we kind of keep on our plate and what do we not want on our plate, literally in this situation versus not overall. Yeah.
So what's interesting is I had spent many years doing elimination diets that were healthy.
Yeah.
I think because I was having mushrooms and garlic and onion, which are other sensitivities that I have, because they were the healthy things.
Yeah.
I was never getting to the answer.
I see.
So by going full on carnivore, it made it easier.
Yeah.
It took 6 weeks. So 6 weeks of full on.
Yeah.
That was all I did. But what is fascinating to me is I can handle dairy. No problem. I spent so many years thinking dairy was the problem for me, and it isn't. And so I can have that. Anyway, everybody is different. Like, that's what I realized is, and we can't judge ourselves for this.
Yeah.
Right? But it was so frustrating to know that I was eating chicken, potatoes, rice, pasta sometimes, and like half a cup at a time, and vegetables. I used to have like a stir fry a day. And that was it. And I was so bloated and so much heavier and so inflamed. I felt like I was an 85-year-old woman.
Ouch. Yeah.
And my hormones, everything.
Which is not where you are in life. And
no.
you shouldn't feel that way. Yeah.
But you know what? I'm hoping that I can be an 85-year-old woman when I get there and not
Exactly.
feel like what I would call an 85-year-old woman.
Yeah.
But it was being willing, and I'm really good at the extreme.
Yeah.
To go all out. But I mean, if somebody's willing to do the work and even do because if I get a little bit of it, I'm gonna have a lot of it.
Yeah.
Right? That tends to happen. But I'm getting better with that. But yeah, that's what it took. And so now I have different things like, well, and I find Mexican corn doesn't bother me. Oh, but the other thing is that fascinated me was when I reintroduced anything that was processed. Cheap chocolate.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like I was just, I could
processed foods. Processed foods. We want to keep everything as unprocessed whole foods as possible.
But if you don't ever get away from it for long enough that your body can actually send you the signal that it hates it, you're never going to know.
For sure.
And that's why I believe, like you said, elimination is the key to figuring out what the thing is.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I just did my elimination a little bit more extremely than most. And I don't recommend it because, only when you've gone to a point where you've done everything.
Yeah.
And I had doctors and, this and everything, and I just couldn't figure it out. And the testing, and then finally, voila.
There you go. Well, that's great to hear that, your body's less stressed physically by the foods that a lot of patients suffer from. We hope that your sarcoidosis also finds its way out the door.
It's ready to go.
In the near future. And I think this conversation will probably have a part 2.
I hope so.
As we both go through our journeys. And I really loved our conversation today. And I think that our viewers are going to gain a lot of nuggets of information that they're going to take home and benefit from overall. So thank you so much for coming in today. This has been great. I loved it.
Appreciate you.
And so for our listeners, where can they find you if they wanted to?
Best place is AllisonGraham.com.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Allison. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks.